So here we're at part 2 of Why Does the United States of America Do This to Me? And we're going to start in this video, which by the way we're going to have more than 2 videos. I've found out it's going to take longer, but we're going to start with some background and contextual information about Wells Fargo. So Wells Fargo is a multinational bank that has an absolutely enormous presence in the United States, and it has a significant presence in other countries. And at any given time, during the past 6 or 7 years, at any given time, Wells Fargo has had a $1.8 trillion to $2 trillion balance sheet. What that means is that at any given time, Wells Fargo's total assets were between 1.8 trillion and 2 trillion. And when people say they got a balance sheet of so much, that's how many assets they've got. And then the other side of the balance sheet matches up, which is liabilities and stockholders' equity. But focus on the assets. That's a good way to look at it. 2 trillion in assets. It is a too big to fail / G-SIB. Too big to fail. This is kind of the colloquial or the informal term given to a bank that is so extremely large that it cannot be allowed to fail without causing damage to the broader economy. Okay, this is with these banks that are too big to fail, it's catastrophic damage. That is there's a potential for catastrophic damage to the national and or global economy. The too big to fail will be applied to what's called systemically important financial institutions, and also to the G-SIBs. The difference is that the systemically important financial institutions, they have a much lower bar to meet in terms of their assets, in terms of their presence, and it's generally believed that the economic impact of them would be contained mostly in the nation that they reside in, and then these G-SIBs. Okay, this is the other category, and this is a name given by international banking bodies, different organizations that advise governments on banking policy, and this stands for Global Systemically Important Bank, and that is the term given to a bank that is of such a massive size. It is so interconnected into the broader economy that an unexpected failure would cause a financial crisis that would threaten the economy of the entire earth. Okay, so that's what we're dealing with Wells Fargo. Too big to fail G-SIB. When they victimized me, or when the first law violation they did against me, they had about 1.95 trillion assets. And it was about the same time that the Federal Reserve froze their balance sheet and told them that they can't go above anything above 1.95 trillion in assets, roughly 1.95 trillion. You can round that up to 2 trillion, and then they've sold off some assets since then, and I think now they're right just barely below 1.9 trillion. Okay, and so item 2 here, this bank committed millions of felonies against its customers between the years 2002 and 2016. And what happens is you had the CEOs and executives, high-level executives, that had this obsession and this extreme overfocus on selling products to customers in their branches. Retail sales. You've got bank tellers and retail bankers are given sales goals that are literally impossible to meet. It is an extraordinarily high-pressure environment. This pressure starts with the executives, and it rolls downhill, and the frontline employees were essentially under a duress. They were under such traumatic stress over the demand to meet these goals that bankers who didn't meet their goals were fired. Those that were coming close to not meeting their goals too much, or maybe they didn't meet them every day. They meet them 4 days out of the week. They're getting threatened. It's constant pressure. People having to stay late, 4 or 5 hours late to meet their sales goals. And it's just a crushing pressure, and it leads to crime. Now, I'll tell you about the crime in just a second, but it's noteworthy that once this crime starts to really get underway, you had bank tellers calling Wells Fargo's ethics line to report the crime. You had tellers telling their branch manager about the crimes that were going on. In both cases, the employees would be fired for doing this. Okay. But the crime that happened was that under this condition of duress, they've got to meet these sales goals. The frontline employees start to make new accounts in their customers' names without their customers' knowledge or consent. And they do this, they make an account in the customer's name and they record it as a sale so that they can meet their goals. So they would go into a customer's account, they would pull their social security number. They would fill out an application for a product. So it might be a new checking account. And so they'll fill out an application using the customer's social security number for checking accounts and open a new checking account. Or they'll fill out an application for a credit card, again using the customer's social security number. And say with the credit card, if it required a confirmation email, the employees would have an email address that the employee created on his or her own to have this email confirmation sent to, and the employee would confirm that yes, they're applying for a credit card, and yes, they're approved, whatever. And in both cases, as needed, the employees would forge the customer's signature. Now, each one of these, they call this the fake account scandal. Each one of these fake accounts involved 2 felony crimes. The first is an independent act of identity theft, and the second is another independent act of falsifying bank records. The LA Times, the news media, caught on to this, that these fake accounts are being created. Then the CFPB follows up, and they catch on to this, and it all blows up in 2016. And the CEO at the time, John Stump, hired an audit firm, PricewaterhouseCoopers, an elite audit firm, to do an audit of the bank's accounts to see how many fake accounts were made. And this analysis is eventually extended to go all the way back to 2002. It started out just going back to 2012 or 2011, something like this. And then they extended it multiple times to go all the way back to 2002. And the auditors come back with a figure of 3.5 million accounts. And they have the qualification that these are accounts that they cannot, quote, cannot rule out fraud. Meaning that they can't say that these are the ones that they can't say for sure that the customer agreed to. The customer initiated on them on their own and did on their own, and what did involve all this crime. Now it's in 2019, March of 2019, according to the media. That's when the media reports that the United States Department of Justice is in talks with Wells Fargo concerning these fake accounts and the crimes involved. And they eventually, Wells Fargo and the United States Department of Justice come to an agreement, and it's a deferred prosecution agreement. And in that agreement, Wells Fargo admits, as part of the agreement, Wells Fargo admits to have opened, quote, millions of fake accounts. So this 3.5 million number leaves it up in the air that there's a question mark because the description is merely that they cannot rule them out. Okay, but what you have to read into this when they admit to creating, quote, millions of fake accounts, that millions, plural, means that there are at least 2 million fake accounts created. And so you take that as the minimum number of 2 million fake accounts, independent act of identity theft, independent act of falsifying bank records involved in each account. This bank committed a minimum of 4 million felonies against its customers. This, as part of this agreement, Wells Fargo is going to pay a $3 billion fine. And Wells Fargo also agrees to not commit any more felonies. And there's a stipulation in the agreements that if Wells Fargo commits any more felonies, that the Justice Department, and it's within a 3-year period, by the way, but the Justice Department will prosecute Wells Fargo not only for the new felonies they've committed, but also for the millions of felonies involved in this fake accounts scandal. Okay, and this agreement is announced on February 20th, 2020. Okay, and one very important very important thing to note here about this is in this hypothetical that Wells Fargo commits more felonies and the Justice Department criminally prosecutes Wells Fargo. One of the penalties that the judge could impose on the bank is the judge could impose a closure of the bank, i.e. a bank failure. Okay, the bank could have its legal right to operate as a business taken away. What would have to happen is the bank would have to go into a liquidation, and the FDIC would have to come in. And of course, we'll talk about the different options the FDIC has later. But the point is this right here, this thing that cannot happen, this too big to fail G-SIB thing that cannot happen, this agreement explicitly threatens that, at least at the judge's discretion if they get a conviction. Okay, so they announced this on February 20th, 2020. On March 25th, 2020, they barely make it a month from here, from signing this agreement, until I am reporting to the Justice Department a slew of very, very, very serious crimes committed by Wells Fargo that were committed during this exact same time period that Wells Fargo was committing crimes. That Wells Fargo was in its talks with the Justice Department. So Wells Fargo, they entered talks with the Justice Department in March of 19. Their crimes against me, extraordinarily serious crimes, began in April of 2019. Okay, and they continue ongoing forever. They're ongoing to this day, essentially. Okay, they're still hitting me with abuse. And I have to think about it when the last crime's been committed. But this crime spree doesn't cease anytime soon. It certainly hasn't ceased by February 2020. It certainly hasn't ceased by March 25th, 2020. And so, the Wells Fargo, they're telling the Justice Department about their intentions to do better. They're telling the Justice Department how they're going to get their act straight. They're telling the Justice Department about how they got these new systems in place that are going to prevent any more crimes from happening. And at the exact same time, they're telling this to the Justice Department. They are running a crime spree against me under the Justice Department's nose in parallel. Okay, now what happens? Is the Justice Department responds that my complaint is not of sufficient detail and that I don't have enough evidence. Now, I had, as of March 25th, 2020, I had very powerful, very, very, very persuasive evidence. Okay, undeniable, very powerful evidence. I have what it takes to shut this bank down then, or to have them held accountable for that. In other words, I have what it takes to prove that crimes have occurred and to be a good cause for search warrants. I mean, these people were toast, but I was severely disabled. But if they want it detailed, that's what they're going to get. And so I spent the next 7 months preparing them a 126-page ultra detailed account complaint, and I also built a web portal where I housed and organized my evidence and my evidence analysis videos, where I explained to the Justice Department, what's happened. Here's my evidence. Here's what this is. Here's what happened here. Here's why this is suspect. Things like this. That's on March 28th. I'm sorry. That's on October 28th, 2020. Now, what happened is in the intervening time between March 25th, 2020, Wells Fargo got a heads up that I'm reporting them to the Justice Department. The Justice Department and Wells Fargo get together. The Justice Department realizes the gravity of the situation, and unbeknownst to me at the time, before I had even submitted my complaint in October of 2020, a state-sponsored cover-up, sponsored by the United States Department of Justice, aka the United States of America. There was a cover-up going on. And when I say the gravity of the situation, what I'm saying there is that the crimes committed against me are so serious. Okay, and to give you an idea of the crimes, I've had a crime called I have repeated kidnappings that were done under the direction of Wells Fargo. And Wells Fargo was involved in the planning and the execution of the kidnappings. The same law enforcement officer that perpetrated kidnappings in conjunction with Atrium Health. Atrium Health was also involved, which that's my hospital, was also involved in the conspiracy to commit these kidnappings. But the officer also committed a crime called deprivation of rights under color of law. This is when a law enforcement officer deliberately violates one of your constitutional rights, and because of the specific circumstances of the crime committed against me, under the law, it's a federal crime, and under the law, this officer is facing up to life in prison for this crime. That's how serious these crimes are, and they've got a bunch of them. Okay, so I've got kidnapping, I've got attempted Medicaid fraud, and I won't list them here, but it's a slew of extraordinarily serious crimes. Okay, perjury, you name it. And these crimes against me, in light of the facts that Wells Fargo is doing this, while they're doing this deferred prosecution agreements, they're doing all this, and in light of the fact that they've already committed these 3 million felonies, these 4 million felonies against their customers in such a short time, the crimes against me, if they were known, would put the onus in the eyes of the public, in the eyes of plenty of others, I'm sure, would put the onus on the OCC to revoke Wells Fargo's charter. They would put the onus on the Justice Department to criminally prosecute Wells Fargo. Okay, that the decision to allow Wells Fargo to continue would be an indefensible decision. And again, that's going to give us a bank failure. Now, there are a few things to note about the bank failure that would be created by a criminal prosecution of Wells Fargo and by the OCC revoking the bank's charter to do business. One is this debate that we have that goes on about are these banks safe enough that there's not going to have to be a taxpayer bailout? Are we going to have to get a bailout from the taxpayer? That doesn't come into play at all. That's not a relevant question, because this is not a question when the bank fails as a result of its charter being revoked for involvement in crime. It's not a question of does the bank have sufficient liquidity to survive or nothing like that. It's a question of the bank is not legally allowed to operate. Okay, it's a dead business. There's no resuscitating it with or without taxpayer money. Okay, and of course, well, actually, I'll give you another note here. If they had stopped committing crimes against me on February 20th, 2020, they would not be in violation of this deferred prosecution agreement. That is because, the date the agreement signed, it looks forward 3 years into the future, and it doesn't say anything about what happened retroactively. Okay. However, as this crime spree continues and continues and continues, okay, it's like literally, and it basically never ends. They're always either planning or executing crime in 2020. That's what they're doing. This is for sure. This is a violation of this agreement, and there's just no getting out of this. There would be no defending the decision to allow this bank to continue to operate. And as I say, and as I've said repeatedly, the Justice Department has sponsored a cover-up. That's what I've got evidence for. That's what I've made my evidence analysis videos, where I narrate what has occurred, and where I provide the evidence of the crimes. And in the next video, we'll get in to how this too big to fail G-SIB phenomena works, and how my situation, the situation involving me, is a threat of the economy of the entire earth. And I'll give you some details as to how that works, and you'll be able to understand it, and it will kind of make sense to you.